And with permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish to make a statement about COP28. It was a privilege to attend the summit in Dubai over the past 2 weeks, and I was proud to represent a country which has cut greenhouse gas emissions more than any other major economy since 1990, which has taken our share of renewable electricity from a rather dismal 7% in 2010 to almost half today, while almost entirely phasing out coal power, which has led the world, Madam Deputy Speaker, in mobilising green finance, and which is now making sure we bring the British public with us on the transition to net zero, thanks to the Prime Minister's plans to protect families from unnecessary costs and give people more time to adapt to changes. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, while we are on track, the world is not. The global stocktake confirmed emissions need to peak by 2025 and fall by 43% between 2019 and 2030 in order to achieve the Paris goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. The current pace of global decarbonisation is well behind this trajectory, and the urgency of the climate challenge means we can't delay any further. The Russian invasion of Ukraine underlined the importance of transitioning towards renewables which are less vulnerable to price shocks. That's why our objectives throughout COP28 were clear. We needed to agree urgent action to ensure 1.5 degrees remains viable as a ceiling. That included trebling global renewables, doubling energy efficiency, and phasing out unabated fossil fuels. And we needed to reform international finance so as to unlock the trillions required in climate funding. Today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am delighted to say that we have secured a final agreement which supports those goals. An agreement which, for the first time ever, calls and gets global agreement to a transition away from fossil fuels. This agreement on fossil fuels builds and expands upon the UK's leadership at COP26, which had the first reference to phasing down of coal power and secured agreements behind efforts to decarbonise key sectors of the global economy. And, most notably, saw the proportion of global GDP covered by net zero targets go from around 30% to 90% during our presidency. The agreement made at COP28 this week is not perfect. We wanted to see more action on coal and ending the construction of new coal power plants in particular. This is a turning point, unifying the world around a common commitment, listening to the islands in the Pacific and elsewhere whose voices must be heard, and showing we are responding to the science to move away from fossil fuels and raising a torch to inspire action.
Secretary of State Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Minister for his statement and indeed for his regular commuting between Dubai and Westminster. I think given that he brought the last government down over fracking, he didn't want a repeat performance, and hence his return. Can I, Madam Deputy Speaker, welcome some of the key outcomes from COP28, in particular the commitments on renewables and, crucially, a transition away from fossil fuels. This shows that the COP process, however flawed and imperfect, can provide a forcing mechanism for. Can I also pay tribute to the civil servants in the Minister's department for their very hard work? Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, by a remarkable coincidence, the breakthrough in the negotiations occurred in the 24 hours when they were left in charge and the Minister came home. The question for the world in the run-up to COP29 in Azerbaijan and COP30 in Brazil is whether good words at COP28 are finally matched by actions equal to the scale of the emergency. These will be the defining 2 years in this, the decisive decade, which will shape the lives of generations to come. And so we need a government in the UK that will stop congratulating itself and using the UK's record as an excuse for future inaction, and will lead at home in a way that is consistent with what we are demanding of others. The Minister complained about a lack of action on coal at COP, but this government is opening a new coal mine. They're watering down emissions targets, seeking to drill every last drop in the North Sea, starting a culture war on net zero. Madam Deputy Speaker, now he's right. The fear of many countries is that there will be those who seek to use loopholes in the COP agreement to avoid this reality. Our government is doing precisely this, because it says it wants to drill every last drop in the North Sea, which the International Energy Agency, the Energy Transitions Commission, the Climate Change Committee, the former president of the COP, the Right Honourable Member for Reading West, all say is incompatible with the science. So can can he explain how he expects to persuade other countries to have policies to meet their targets when anyone can see we're miles off meeting ours? The positive outcomes at COP came despite this government, not because of it. Britain needs a government that will show climate leadership again, not climate hypocrisy, to cut bills, deliver energy independence, grow our economy and protect future generations. And in the next 2 years, more than ever, the world needs climate leadership from Britain. Isn't the truth that people at home and abroad have seen enough to know this government can't provide that leadership that the world so urgently needs?
Right Honourable Gentleman focuses on the performance. I'm pleased to say that every single carbon budget has been met by this government today. The only major targets set on climate change in this country that have been failed have been, let me think, oh yes, the 10% renewables set by the government of which he was a member by 2010 failed. The 20% reduction in emissions by 2010, again set by the government of which he served, failed. Every single carbon budget that this government has been responsible for since my then party leader was the first leader to call for the Climate Change Act has been met. Our record is without parallel, and I won't have it talked down, trash talked down by the right honourable gentleman, whose record in government is so at odds with the words that he uses.
That agreement and all previous agreements are literally just words on a page, and they will only come to fruition if all countries follow through in terms of their domestic policies. So he talked about the torch to inspire others. Let me ask him once again, would he please review once again the plan to have these annual oil and gas licences and consider whether that is consistent with the international commitments that we've made?
Coal, and he returns to, if the right honourable gentleman could for 1 second be quiet. He did so little in government and he has so much to say now. It's quite a contrast, isn't it? But if I may return to the fundamental to delivering the energy transition, and I hope, even if I have little hope of the right honourable gentleman opposite, who has always managed to have inconsistent and incoherent thoughts in his head all at the same time, I'm hoping perhaps the Scottish Nationalist Party can come to its senses and support Scottish workers and the energy transition. Actually, it was. If she could just be quiet for a moment, it was actually.
Thank you, Madam
Deputy Speaker. Licensing aside, what sensible proposals does the Minister have to offer hope to the 1,500 people living in my constituency and the other 200,000 who we referenced earlier, whose jobs depend on oil and gas now and who could power our clean energy future? Offshore Energies UK estimates that if we get the transition right, the workforce could swell by 50%. Where is his plan for these workers?
Well, I thank the honourable lady, and in her coded way, we all know there's an election coming up. I suppose that's as far as she could go to opposing her front bench's opposition to the sustaining of those jobs as we go through the transition. So I think the architecture, which I pay tribute to the right honourable gentleman's opposite and his government at the time, the architecture was the right one and has withstood the test of time.
The Prime Minister spending recent months wrongly telling the country that net zero is a huge burden, rather than the economic opportunity of the 21st century that it is. So how can he, as the Minister, go to developing countries, say they must seize these opportunities provided by net zero, when this is his Prime Minister's message at home?
So this government is walking the walk while absolutely ensuring and making no apology for the fact that it seeks to maintain the national consensus and carry people up and down the country with us as we continue to lead in a way, as he insists on giggling, his government so singularly failed to do before 2010. This country has cut its emissions more than any other major economy on earth, has more ambitious plans going forward. The Prime Minister is behind it, and we must have a balanced discussion around this so as to show that we are not inflexible, or we are prepared to work with people and ensure we do it in the right way.